do it in the next 20 years. And he's still very much a believer. I really like the guy. I spent a lot of time with him in the 80s whenever I was in England, and spent a lot of time with him. But I remember, so he still practiced Scientology outside of the mother cult and was very standard tech, had to be done exactly as written, some of which he'd written, of course, back in about 1970, 71. But he did one day turn to me and he said, the problem with Scientology is it has no compassion. And I looked at him and said, the problem with Scientology is it erodes compassion. But as you say, you're a pacifist in the thuggy cult, and I looked at everything, and whenever Hubbard was ranting, I thought, he's upset today. And I didn't realise that I was meant to revere him as a god. And whatever he said, even if it came from this side of the face or that side of the face and was the opposite, was true. As he himself pointed out, there's I think it's technical D grade, the policy letter, where he says everything, you can't cancel anything. What's more, you can't say this was written more recently and so trumps that. It's all still true, and you're just left in it. And so I put my temperament to it, and I believed that Scientology was a path towards Buddhist enlightenment. Perhaps controversially, I never believed that it could achieve the Buddhist enlightenment. I always believed that when you got to the end of the Scientology bridge, you were going to have to jump. Nobody could take you all the way there. But that really wasn't much of a topic of conversation with my fellow Scientologists. And after I left, because you're not allowed to talk about
verbal tech.
Yeah, it's verbal tech if you describe the technology. You're not allowed to talk about your case, which is any problem you have. You're not allowed to talk to certain people, and communication is the universal solvent, as Oren Hubbard said. I didn't realise until I'd left and people could actually tell me their experiences, just how awful it had been for almost everybody, that they had terrible, humiliating experiences. And some of those people, generation by generation, the 50s generation were the science fiction generation, and they were therefore sciencey geeks who liked E-meters and things like that, early 50s. People like, say, George Hay, who invited Hubbard to England the first time and set up the North East London Polytechnic Science Fiction Library, which is the biggest collection of science fiction outside of, imagine the British Library's got rather more, but, that was, then you got the 60s people and the hippies, and you got a whole, like most of the early Sea Orgs, they're hippies one way or another, all like Captain Bill bikers who've come together. Then you got the late 70s salesmen. Then you got the 80s fascists. And it was sort of the easy attitude 50s people when you interviewed them, when I interviewed them, and I interviewed quite a lot of them, they liked Hubbard. He was a bit of a rogue, and he made stuff up, and, you couldn't always trust him, but he got some good ideas too. When you talk to the late 60s people, when the heavy ethics had come in, it was a different man. When you talk to the 80s people, there was no thinking left. People who joined in the 80s he was venerated. Yeah. And that had never been the attitude. I remember when the policy letter Joking and Degrading came out, we were on a coach going down to a meeting where the Guardian's office were explaining that all they did was steal photocopy paper. And they didn't understand why people wanted to send them to prison. So we were on our way down to that particular piece of grand deception where Diana Hubbard was going to play the piano with us. And my friend Mitch said something about L. Ron's sideboard, which was what he used to call Hubbard for reasons known only to him. He perhaps saw Hubbard cupboard sideboard, there was an elaborate pun going on there. And the ethics officer, who basically was old enough to have a bum fluff moustache, came and showed us this new policy and said we were joking and degrading. Everything changed after that. Yeah. And after that, you couldn't have been a pacifist. It was gone. But I think with most groups, as it was during my time in Scientology, your temperament you'll find the way to fit the group to your temperament, so it makes sense. And which means that the generalised descriptions of cults, a friend Simonetta Poe has recently written to me and said, John, in all your articles you make Scientology sound so awful, and parents who've got somebody involved are going to be really bothered by the things you've been writing at Tony's site. And the answer to that is, well, I'm writing at Tony's site for ex-members, that's it. I'm not addressing any other audience. And, the damage actually can be very severe from a very short involvement. So, you know, I will write something and publish it to respond to it. But it does, it goes through people. It takes them over. It takes over their way of thinking. And if you can, you know, I look back and kind of go, you know, I was in a deposition and Kendrick Moxon, who's the head of Scientology Legal, said, had I been brainwashed by Scientology? I said, no, of course not. Was mind control used? Don't know. Didn't matter, not to me. I was, you know, some hypnotic procedures were used on me. I felt a little euphoric. It was all good. I wasn't humiliated. I wasn't abused. I wasn't locked in that way that most people were.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I read Cults of Unreason. I read Road to Total Freedom. I read The Mindbenders by Vosper while I was a member. You know, and people outside have got this view, oh yeah, you're a cult member, you can't think anymore, there's nothing going on. Well, no, but there is a discernible difference in the way you compartmentalise your thinking and, you know, what you accept and what you don't. So that any trivial error on the part of, say, Christopher Evans in Cults of Unreason, where he says Hubbard went to Africa because he was no longer interested in Scientology, and you go, well, this is what he wrote while he was in Africa, you know, day after day about Scientology.
Yeah.
Bad research. But that's enough for you to say, I mean, I think Monica Pignotti criticised me because I'd said that Quentin Hubbard had done the bridge twice. Well, as Dennis Ehrlich pointed out, he was ordered to retread the bridge, but he didn't do all of Scientology a second time. Monica Pignotti from that determined that if I'd got that wrong, how could you trust anything I'd said? And it's like, well, look at the footnotes and you'll see that I'm quoting from Hubbard or what have you. But there is that dangerous thing which, you know, the cult member will have that I suppose anybody can have, that where you see that somebody is mistaken in their criticism of your beliefs, that means you don't have to listen to them. Yeah. And John Stuart Mill, again, you have to keep listening.
It's a form of confirmation bias. You
exactly.
find this one little flaw. I can remember someone back in the early 80s reading an expose of the Unification Church, not long before the Daily Mail finally won their case.
Yeah.
And there was one, I don't know whether it was a misquotation or a mistype or misprint, what the reason was, but it wasn't quite right. And he ignored the entire rest of the book.
Oh, he spelled the word Wednesday,
which was accurate, ignored the entire rest of the book and focused on this one little point. And that was the book gone.
And as you say, it's confirmation bias, which is the notion in psychology that we will accept and affirm the things that agree with us and reject the things that don't, which is normal human behaviour.
Yes.
No mind control involved.
And that's important to remember that, and again, this is something that families will come to me, and their terror, and it is a terror, is that something has been done to their loved one that is inexorable and irreversible, and it's too late to help them, and what are we going to do next? And maybe that's why they have to be, you know, kidnapped or something drastic done to them because what's happened is so abnormal and they'll never be the same again, and they get into this cycle of panic and terror. And it's important to be able to say to them, no, a lot of what's happened is normal, but more so. And some of it is indeed a kind of manipulation, but nothing is permanent. The brain is plastic, the mind grows and learns, and it is possible for this person to reevaluate, and that's what we're going to try to do. Sometimes just the act, and I've seen this as well, just the act of saying out loud the different things that the group means to them, and hearing those things in juxtaposition. It's hard to compartmentalize when you say A and not A right after one another. It becomes harder to make that compartmentalization. And if eventually, as often happens, one of the family members says, but you know, before when you were explaining that bit up there, you said this, and now you've just said that, and I don't see how those two meet. And that can be enough to begin the process of actually thinking about these things rather than boxing them up and putting them away where they don't touch anything else.
I think maybe take a break.
Okay.
To put another battery in.
Ooh, put another battery in.
It's amazing. It's still going. It's an hour and 20 minutes. Very good. No.